Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining our Monday morning short 1-hour webinar about climate targets. My name is Marko Siller. I'm the founder of Sustinere. We are, I saw from registered participants list that many of you know us well, but not everybody. So Sustinere is a pan-Baltic ESG and sustainability agency. We help companies to deal with sustainability matters, help to find the directions and solve questions what you have around there. We have been on the market more than 8 years, having a team of 25 and more people today, having been worked with 200 and more clients across the Baltics and having more than 500 users on our ESG and climate impact digital platform. So this is who we are, and this is the experience based on what we bring today's webinar to you. Today's 1-hour agenda is packed, so rather let's go straight to the point. As told, and as you know, of course, as you have registered yourself here, we're talking about setting climate targets today. We focus on science-based targets initiative. The majority of the content is around that, but I think it's very relevant to know that majority of the content what we share today is relevant and useful for you also otherwise. If you're not planning to submit your targets for science-based targets validation, then the idea remains the same. So I really hope that you'll get some useful inputs from here. So after my short introduction, my colleague, partner, and then senior environmental expert from Sustinere, Taavi Vaasma, will take it over to guide you through some essentials about climate target setting with Science-Based Targets Initiative. And then after that, we'll have 3 short interviews from TET Latvia. Adriana will join us from there. Utilitas Estonia, Kaidi will join us, and then Maxima Gruber from Lithuania, so where Kirill will share their experience. If you have any questions, then ask them in chat window. We try to answer them in written during the webinar or address during the conversations if possible. If not, then we'll definitely answer the questions afterwards. So for sure you will get your answers. But a few slides for the context for the very beginning. So, well, I guess as you are here, then maybe there is a clear reason why you are there. But for the ones who still are here to figure out like why and if I should still set the climate targets, 4 reasons what we see are the most relevant. So, well. Firstly, we see that setting climate targets and then especially coming up with some measures and activities what to do in order to achieve the targets helps you to find additional measures and opportunities for resource efficiency and then therefore also cost efficiency. So this could be the first benefit. Secondly, we see that having climate targets in place help the companies to increase their resilience. So lower risks in the supply chain from regulatory requirements, but also from financial side, from tax issues, etc. Considering that activities which are which have higher impact for the climate will be taxed and financed higher. Thirdly, we see that, and maybe this is one of the major drivers for our customers so far, is that there is a clear market demand for that, especially in the business-to-business relations, and then when going to export markets. So this is what makes companies to set targets. And thirdly, even in these confusing times for ESG, as you all know, we see that the financial industry, banks, investors are still expecting companies to have better climate practices. So having your targets in place helps you to give better access to finance as well. So this is most probably this broad context. And then talking about this ideal climate impact reduction journey, then of course it should start from measuring your baseline greenhouse gas emissions. So I hope that for majority of you this box is done, and this is what you have done. From a recent Sustinere's annual ESG annual reporting study, which we have conducted for 8 years, I guess, already across the Baltics, we see that out of largest companies, so few hundred largest companies, 8% in Latvia, 18% in Estonia, and then 28% in Lithuania have done, or at least have reported about their climate impact measurements. This is based on the 2023 annual reports data. And then secondly, if you have your baseline measured, then of course you set the targets, how much you want to reduce and by which deadline you want to reduce. And this is what we're going to talk about today. And the same study shows that only 4% of Latvian companies, 25 Estonian, and then 16% of Lithuanian companies had set and had published such targets in their annual report. So yeah, ironically, you see that even more Estonian companies have committed to some targets than have disclosed their actual results. So I think we still have a way to go, but this also shows that there are, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 companies in each country who have actually done that already. So the market practice is already there. And of course, the main journey starts when you now develop action plan, how to get from the baseline to the target. So you need to do different changes in your product design, in your daily processes, but also a lot in your supply chain. So this is where the real work actually starts. So this is the context for today. But I would now hand it over to my colleague Taavi Vaasma, who will guide you through the essentials of science-based targets, setting climate targets through that. So Taavi, take over the screen, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marko, for this introduction. As you said, I will continue from here. So I think I'm also visible nicely. A very warm welcome to everyone. As Marko mentioned, I'm Taavi, a senior environmental expert and partner at Sustinere. So what I'll do today is help you to take a look into the process and some practical tips in setting science-based targets. So we'll have some theory as well as some practical insight from our experience, and this will be later complemented by our guest speakers who will share their practical insights and takeaways. So I think we have a good mixture and chemistry here today. And so let's tune right in. A few words about SBTi to start with. So this is an organization and initiative that really offers companies a clear and actionable path to align their emission reductions with the Paris Agreement. So what does it essentially give is that you have higher certainty that this pathway and these actions that you will take will be aligned with the best climate science. So the process of getting science-based targets, getting your targets also validated, consists roughly of 5 steps. So first, you will submit a commitment letter to the SBTi, basically stating your aim of setting targets, defining your organization type as well. So after this, you will have 2 years to actually develop and submit the actual targets. So the development part is most comprehensive, and we'll look into this in more detail a little bit later on. After that, once this is submitted, there will be a period of this, let's say, Q&A between you and the verifier, during which time the targets that you have stated in your submission will be overlooked, and some additional questions will be most definitely asked. So, but once this is done, once you have your targets validated, you have roughly about 6 months to publicly also communicate about these targets, to make them publicly available to your stakeholders as well as internally. And then on an annual basis, you have to also start reporting on your company-wide emissions and progress towards these targets. So some, let's say, key aspects, what to consider when you are targeting or looking at SBTi. So first of all, there are different target types. So near-term targets as well as net zero targets. What I will bring out is today we will focus on the near-term targets. So looking at a time frame of 5 to 10 years. So the net zero targets are aiming at achieving net zero by 2050. However, near-term targets, as I mentioned, look at the time frame of 5 to 10 years. So basically from the date of your target submission, 5 to 10 years into the future, when you are stating the reduction percentage, basically. And also a note that you will have to select the base year, and the base year, so basically the year to which you are comparing your progress with, the base year cannot be before 2015. So 2015 is the earliest date, but your base year can be also the year when you submit your targets. Also, you have to define or look the company type. So there are different target validation routes for corporates and for small and medium-sized enterprises. What are the differences, and can you be classified an SME? We'll look at that in a minute or two as well, but keep this in mind. An important aspect is the target coverage. So basically, how much of the greenhouse gas emissions you have to include under your target. For scope 1 and 2, the coverage is 95%, and for scope 3, the coverage is 67%. Now, you have to keep in mind that there is also an additional clause that if your scope 3 emissions are over 40% of your total scope 1 to 3 emissions, then you have to include them under your target. Otherwise, it's not required. And when you are setting your targets, you have to also follow the target alignment criteria. So the scope 1 and 2 emissions have to be in line with 1.5 degree scenario, and your scope 3 targets have to be in line with well below 2 degree scenario. What does it mean? We'll take a look into this in a minute or two. Before that, just as I mentioned, there's an important aspect of defining what kind of corporate or company type you are in terms of SBTi. So small and medium-sized enterprises. So there are criteria set by the SBTi to determine if you qualify as an SME. So let's say the main aspects to consider this is that SMEs are not required to set near-term targets for scope 3 emissions. However, they still must commit to at least measuring and reducing them. But there will be no specific targets for scope 3, only for scope 1 and 2. So just to highlight some of the main criteria to keep in mind, if you start looking through, are you possibly, can you be included as an SME and in the SME target validation route? So basically, you have to have your scope 1 and 2 emissions below 10,000 tons CO2 equivalent. You are not classified as a financial institutions or in oil and gas sector, and you are not required to set targets using this sector-specific criteria, sector decarbonization approach. So there are different methods there, and some sectors have requirements to use specific methods. And also, you cannot be a subsidiary of a parent company whose all combined business fall into the corporate validation route. And in addition, there are 3 or more aspects that you have to be in line with. So number of employees below 250, turnover below 50 million, and assets below 25 million. And you're not mandatory of forest, land, and agriculture sector. So again, this can be rechecked, but these are the main, criteria you can take a look at to determine this. Now, I mentioned this ambition level. So here we are talking about corporate validation route, not SMEs. Trying to keep this picture a little bit more clear and not to make it too colorful. There are different methods that the company can choose to develop the targets. So I will highlight here the main ones that are most applicable to all type of corporations and to different scopes. So 2 types of methods that I will be briefly discussing here is this cross-sectoral absolute reduction. So basically absolute contraction approach, where the minimum ambition level is 4.2% of linear annual reduction. A little bit depends on the base year, but overall it gives you the understanding of what is the required absolute reduction rate. There is also a possibility to use intensity-based methods. So there is the sector-specific intensity convergence called SDA. But here it really depends on the specific sector that you're operating, as well as the different inputs that your company is using. So there you have to look into the guidance and available documents that are in the SBTi that can you use also the sector-specific methods. So as I mentioned, these are the 4.2% is in line with 1.5 degree ambition level. If we're looking at scope 3, we have also the same method options. Here, it has to be in line with well below 2 degree ambition. And with this linear reduction rate, it would mean 2.5% of annual reduction rate. Like I mentioned, there are more methods. For example, for scope 3, there is a possibility to have this economic and physical intensity-based approaches, as well as customer and stakeholder engagement opportunities. So again, basically what I would highlight, if you go into this process, what you should keep in mind is first, check if these sector-specific methods are available for the company and the sector you are operating. Review the methods to apply relevant and feasible one for your company. So try to see which one would be most, feasible, practical in terms of your company type, and assess the minimum ambition levels and really determine how to get there. So if you see what are the expected ambition levels, bring in this kind of scenario analysis to determine what kind of actions you can actually take to move towards these targets. So these have to be, feasible. So you have to run these kind of scenarios through and then create this whole picture and stating your ambition level. Now, as I mentioned, the developing of the recommendations is the most comprehensive part. So just to highlight the key elements there. So first, define your organizational boundary. Like we stated before, are you a parent company or a subsidiary? Can you go through the SME route or the corporate route? So have clarity in that. The second thing, which is quite comprehensive, is carrying out organizational greenhouse gas emission calculations. So really what we suggest is start with this kind of screening approach. So determine what are the most important impact categories and within these categories that you have determined that are most important, carry out more detailed assessments. So this gives you more clarity of what are the actual sources of greenhouse gas emissions. And then you can start really, creating this scenario analysis. What can you actually do? Can you change some energy input, where you source your energy, where you source your input materials, etc. And for the rest, you can use more, let's say, overall screening approaches to determine the emissions there. Also, selecting a base year. So keep in mind the time frame. What is the earlier date? You can choose your base year and consider, is this a representative year for your business? As well as if you're choosing a year where you have maybe some previous years, you already have conducted some activities that have helped you to reduce your emissions. So you could consider involving these as well, which will allow you to show this progress already when you are setting these targets. So really go through and check what is the most suitable base year that can be applicable to you. Also, a comprehensive part is actually planning these greenhouse gas reductions. So as I mentioned, really focus on the largest categories, run through different scenario analysis. What can you change? What inputs can you change? How much of an effect it could have on your total greenhouse gas emissions, and how well it helps you to move towards the targets that you're planning to set, either absolute reduction targets or intensity-based targets. These decisions require also finances. So what we definitely recommend is to involve the board and decision makers as early as possible. So basically, you have to have the mandate from the board in order to move towards achieving these targets, that there are different finances also available for that. And when we talk about finances and different resources, so in addition to financial resources, also to have necessary human resources, because our cooperation with different companies have shown that, the people's workload who will be involved in these activities can become rather high at some points. So most likely, depending on the time and depending on the size of a company, likely these additional workloads cannot be really squeezed within their, existing work assignments. And lastly, also consider external assistance in cases where you feel things can get overwhelming. It can be related with, conducting or reviewing your already existing calculations, helping to choose the base year, as well as running scenario analysis and setting targets, to filling the submission forms and coordinating this with SBTi verifier. So it helps you to save time and reduce the risk as well. So basically, these were the insights and tips I wanted to share from firsthand from our side. So the process can look a little bit complex. However, once started, things will fall into place. Now, with that being said, I'll hand over back to you, Marco, to introduce our next guest speakers.
Thank you, Taavi, for showing us the surface. So the devil is always in details. You managed to bring several of these details on the table. I think it needs a further elaboration by every single one of you individually. So Taavi personally, and then also other people in our team have supported, advised a few companies here in the Baltics who have worked with this climate target setting, or more specifically science-based target setting. So if you didn't ask your questions now, then you can always approach Taavi or our team afterwards, and then we gladly show you the right directions, at least suggest from where to start. But as promised, let's continue with a few practical stories about climate target setting, and all of them are one or another way related to science-based targets initiative and targets as well. And my first conversation partner is Adriana Kaulina from Latvia, who is a business sustainability manager in a TET, which is a telecommunication company. And as we know, there are not that many telecommunication companies on the market, so meaning that you are still a large one in Latvian market, so a large organization. And yes, we have the honor to know with Adriana for several years already, and I always admire your well-focused and high ambitious work what you do there. So glad that you joined us. But Adriana, to go straight to the point, what made the TET to set your climate targets, go to this reduction path, and then maybe go to this science-based targets validation as well? We know that you have not set the target set, you are still in the process of that, so you are a good example of a company who have not reached there yet, but you are in the process. So what made you to do that?
Yes, hello from Riga. So basically, I believe that every company which has an ESG agenda has to do with the climate targets. So emission reduction must be on agenda. And if we speak about the credible targets, then it's science-based targets, especially because it's also mandated by EU legislation, this reporting legislation, which basically pictures on how a company's ESG agendas should look like, how detailed they should be. So we are in this because, well, we don't have a financing that would depend on our ESG performance. And when it comes to our customers, yeah, we have a large international corporates, but none of them actually has required us directly to have science-based targets. They have asked us whether we are measuring emissions and whether we are looking towards some targets, but not really making us to commit. So basically, I believe because we may not be as large or as significant supplier to them to be dependent on us in terms of engagement. Yeah, and then of course, well, I will get back to the status on how far are we in a minute, but then this EU omnibus comes into the play, and that actually makes me reconsider our science-based target setting, really because of the scope 3, because what we have intended is that for scope 1 and 2, which is our direct emissions, we would go for this absolute reduction, and it totally makes sense, and we have started it, and more like base year is 2023, and no problem with that. But with scope 3, we would go for engagement target. And with current EU omnibus proposal, which is really raising the threshold for companies to have ESG agenda. What I see after investigating my suppliers, that we would really have a difficulty with that, because we would lack, like, you know, this collective commitment and to nudge companies to engage, to start measuring emissions, to set targets, and that's not really a very easy deal. It would be easier if there would be, you know, like this collective commitment that we all do it, and this is something that would be appreciated by many customers, not just by single TET. And once that part of the story falls out, I'm kind of all my science-based target story really is threatened to fall apart. Of course, there is this SME standard, but we do not qualify. But maybe if the new reporting thresholds would be established, we could expect science-based targets to follow, but that's too unclear now to speak about.
If you step back maybe a bit from this either science-based targets or not, having climate targets and the plan to reduce your carbon footprint in general, so can you as an organization somehow actually benefit? Yes, you mentioned already that you personally or your company doesn't have that direct market demand or your finances doesn't depend on it, but is there anything else? Where's the business case for you? What's this action and very tangible benefit, what you get and what you want to get from having these climate targets and then getting this reduction done? Is there anything what you would bring out?
Well, currently I must say this is more like value-based decision, not really with the strong business case behind it. Yes, you might see in Latvia there is only, you know, the 8% of what that have committed or have set, or the other number was even lower. So there is not really some precondition for any customer, from any customer, for us to have such targets. Yeah.
But you touched a bit already this omnibus and then these effects of let's say lowering the reporting thresholds in EU. So has this changed your ambitions as well, or a path there? So is there anything else what you would like to add? You touched this a bit already, but
well. ESG is to stay on that agenda. It's just about maybe the details or the scope or the coverage, because if we would not be mandated by to go like full program, we would go with this voluntarily standard anyway. And that is also softer on setting climate targets. And I am really looking, well, I'm looking forward to more definite stance on how things will evolve, because currently I am at the point where I'm ready for any scenarios. We have like prepared our sustainability report already according to EU current reporting standards, so we can continue that, and we are like all ready to submit science-based targets. Well, few homeworks to done, but I will linger until some October to see whether to do it or not.
Okay, but last topic to touch with you is your learning points about the process. So you promised that you will share a few with us. So you are in the middle of the process. What have you learned, and then what would you recommend to others? What to do, what not to do?
Yes. So basically, in the summer of last year, we did our first blueprint, where first we learned that the science-based targets is something that should be submitted at the group level, and we are the group of companies. And at that time, we have like construction branch, which was not really calculating emissions at that time. So we did our homework until this summer. We have included our construction branch too. And but the main conclusions or the main scenarios we drafted already last summer, and it was obvious that for scope 3 we would go for this engagement target. And what we realized is that we need to do a few more homeworks and basically learn about our suppliers, how our supplier base would look like, what is their ESG maturity, whether they would be reliable partners for this, and who are the list of partners contributing to the most of scope 3 emissions. So we did that during our summer spring period, and the conclusions there is that the picture might look very different for each company and that depends heavily on the business model, on the industry in which you are in, what is your, what are your business line, how much of each business line contributes to your business, and what profile are your suppliers. And this was very also interesting that different sectors actually have different maturity levels when it comes to ESG. Like, for example, energy companies, they all have exemplifying practices. IT or ITC companies are in a very good shape. But for example, it might be challenging when it comes to distributors or wholesalers or maybe producers of some media content. And then it's this mix of match of who could you put together to have an engagement target that will lead to success. Anyway, this journey with suppliers was really the challenging one, and this is why I am coming back to this collective commitment, which I'm very sad seeing to go. Which would, for the case of engagement, really make things more difficult. And for engagement, why we went for engagement is really that for Scope 3 we are still doing spend-based emission calculations, so we didn't have enough guts to say that we will go for a direct reduction because our methods are not that exact. But for Scope 1 and 2, this is something where we feel very confident. We, as a large energy user, we already have set the goal that we will switch to renewable energy by 2030, gradually each year, every step more. And that will also bring us for our Scope 1 and 2 necessary this reduction in line with science-based targets.
Good, Adriana. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. I hope that everybody got some few points from here, what to keep in mind. We appreciate your time. Thank you for sharing, and enjoy the other speakers as well. We continue with Kaidi Kaaret, who is environmental and sustainability specialist in Utilitas, also our long-time customer, Estonian origin company operating in renewable energy and utility industry. So Kaidi, are you with us?
Yes. Hi. Hello. Also hi from Tallinn.
Yes, and glad to have you with us as well, and good that you could join. As I understand from Utilitas, you have been one of the ones, as you have a wider team there, as we know, who have worked with setting your climate targets. Utilitas has also science-based targets, validated target set. So what made you to do that? How would you describe the context and the background? So why having climate targets in place is relevant for Utilitas?
Well, as Utilitas is an energy company, this means that we have both the opportunity and the responsibility of decarbonizing, because the energy sector is central, and without the energy companies leading that transition, nobody else is going to achieve carbon neutrality either. So we do realize that we have that responsibility. And so SBTi was initially introduced to us by investors or owners, but it quickly became this way of also proving our connection, like our commitment, because it shows that there's no greenwashing. You can't really skip any scopes, any categories. You can't pick certain things that you'd like to decrease. You have to decrease all of it. Up to 90% of your emissions you have to actually decrease, and offset only the last remaining 10%. So it's quite strict.
So science-based targets gave you a good and credible kind of like a framework where to base your decisions and have it hold on in a credible way, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, also now, as I've gone through the process, I'd say that I trust those companies more that have also gone through the process, because it is quite specific. I mean, they even go through like a web check and then look up for news about your company and ask about those specific purchases on it and everything. So it's quite detailed.
But if you jump to this, your learning points from the process already, maybe as the conversation went there. So how was the process of setting the targets in general and applying to the science-based targets validation as well? How was it? How would you describe it? What were the major learnings from there? What others should consider?
Yeah, so we actually we went in quite blind because we had already been calculating our carbon emissions for quite a long time, but SBTi is specific. So we chose the absolute target reductions, which is a no-brainer for an energy company, at least in scope 1 and 2, but scope 3 is of course more difficult. What we did not know before was that you actually have to decrease 90% and then offset the remaining 10% as residual emissions. But even then, what we didn't know was that that offsetting, that can't just be planting trees or projects in some developing countries. It has to be carbon capture and storage, which is also quite a challenge. We also learned that, like, because we've been calculating emissions for a while, but when you actually start developing that base year and you compare your most previous year and your base year, then you start to see that it might not reflect your reality anymore. So we actually had to go through changing our base year to the most recent year so that it would be in line and actually show what the company has grown into. And also, since our data collecting systems and everything had improved so much over time, that it was just the option was either to recalculate or change. So we decided to change it. Mm-hmm. I think one important thing that other companies could also learn from was that SBTi has a quite specific timeline, and they expect you to stick to it, so that you might be in the waiting line for, I don't know, quite a few months or maybe even up to a year. But then once they get started with you, they expect you to answer quite promptly. And then you really have to stick to the timeline that they give you. Otherwise, you'll be back to the waiting list.
Very good and practical notices. So thank you for sharing those. Any other, I don't know, bottlenecks or struggles which you had during the process, either with towards science-based targets or maybe more towards your own organization as well? On one hand, you told that, well, for an energy company, especially renewable energy company as you are, it's a no-brainer that you do that. But were there still any challenges to get your wider team behind this idea to submit and then go through this SBTi bureaucracy? Or
I think rather it's, as Adriana also said, that this scope 3 reductions, because it really should be a collective effort, because there are a lot of different players involved. And right now we can say that we definitely can decrease like 90% of our scope 3 emissions. So that's probably the most difficult part of it. Because it is also so rigid when it comes to scope 3, at least. For us, we are completely focused and committed to reducing scope 1 and 2, but scope 3 is where the issues are, or like where's the most confusion, I guess, and how to actually achieve that.
And maybe last thing, if and how much the same this omnibus and the changes on this regulatory side have affected you? Well, you have other drivers as well, as you told, but still, are there any changes due to that?
Actually, no, because our climate strategy and the targets, they were already set up way before this confusion with ESRS or omnibus or anything like that. So our strategy remains exactly the same. Rather, the reporting and everything was more of a formality, and the content is still there.
Very good, Kaidi. Thank you for your very, very direct and clear and specific suggestions, notices, and the pieces of the experience what you shared. So appreciate your time and yes, stay with us if you have time to listen to what our third speaker has to share as well. So thank you, Kaidi. And we continue now with Kirill Sanko, who is the head of sustainability in Maxima Group. So I think we all know Maxima, most probably the largest private company or group of companies in the Baltics at all. So Kirill, are you with us?
Yes, good evening, everyone.
Hey, so glad to conclude this series of conversations with you. Maxima Group has also, for some time already now, had its climate targets in place, submitted and validated by Science Based Targets Initiative. So the same question to you. So being, well, I think out of these four speakers, you are the most clearly in this consumer industry. What made you to do that? So what was the reason why you did that, went to set your climate targets in general? So please elaborate a bit around that.
Yes, sure. So I think if we look at the retail sector itself, how it looks like, in the Baltic states, in Poland, even in Bulgaria, a lot of major retailers, they already have set science-based targets. They're in the process of it. So it's just like becoming a common practice for retailers. So that is, one of the reasons why we were also like following the same trend, the same approach that other retailers are taking. Another thing that we were considering is future-proofing ourselves and learning from it. So basically, the earlier you set the science-based targets, the earlier you start understanding how to deal with it, how to manage the inventory calculation, your reductions, it might become easier for you in the future. We think that in a certain amount of time, maybe in 5 years, once again, it might be later or earlier, we're not sure with the current changes in the ESG regulation, but at some point we believe that it will become more or less mandatory, and that will be like a baseline. So when you have enough understanding on how to deal with it, it will be easier for you in the future. And also one thing I would like highlight that since the science is getting more information on the climate change itself, and since we look, on how we are progressing with the Paris Agreement, the Science-Based Target Initiative, they are adjusting their ways of setting the goals, and they are becoming more complicated, more in-depth. So it's easier to start early and then to adapt and build on what you already have learned. And another thing I believe why we set those goals was also we understood that at least when looking on scope 1 and 2, the actions we would need to take to achieve the reduction targets are basically in line with our business targets. We're talking about efficiency, phase out of the most climate heavy refrigerants. So basically that is part of our business anyway, so it's not something that is completely changing the way that we are doing our everyday tasks.
So basically you tell that having this climate targets and action plan in place helps you to, as you told, phase out some climate heavy initiatives or measures, replace with let's say less climate heavy, better ones, but also to win for your resource efficiency and cost efficiency. Did I get it right? So you see this tangible benefit there as well.
Yes, it basically goes in line. So it's not something that is, putting additional unknown OPEX or CAPEX on you, which you don't know how you will be financing. Another thing that I would also mention that our approach to setting the target was that, first of all, we calculated how we will reach those targets. Only after we understood how we will do it, we committed to setting the targets. So basically after committing, I believe we submitted targets within a month, something like that. So basically we did our homework before committing.
But maybe elaborate or explain a bit about this homework. So what exactly did you do in order to be clear, like what you could commit out and what not?
Yeah, so basically when we have already established what is our baseline year, what will be the target reduction, we have started exploring what would be like the different initiatives, like different projects we would need to implement to get to that target. So we have calculated what would be the cost of it, what would be like the energy reduction. So we were able to estimate what is the return on investment, if it is, okay with our own understanding what is a good return on investment. So it was more like getting into the financials, into the numbers, and seeing that it is doable and it is not something that is outside our normal understanding, what is a economically feasible approach. So we just collected all those measures, we put, into an action plan, and so we know what we need to do in what time frame to get to our target.
And the same question too, what I asked from Adriana and Kaidi before. So what have you learned, or what has your organization learned or faced and then learned during this process? So some challenges, some notices, what you would highlight and recommend for others to keep in mind as well?
Yeah, so one of the things I would say is set aside a reasonable amount of time. You want to be able to do everything like in a month. It takes time, and also the validation process is long due to the waiting line. At least when we were submitting our target, it was prior to splitting the SBTi into standard setter, and the auditor, like who's validating the targets. At that point, we waited for 8 months, in queue. But yeah, the process after you have, reached your validation step is quite fast. I believe it took us around 6 weeks with the SBTi verifiers to get everything done. So yeah, just set aside, reasonable time to prepare yourself, wait for the point where the validation starts, and be available during the validation period itself. And when it comes to calculation of the scope 3 emissions, I believe that is a major challenge for everyone. I believe the main thing is setting the materiality for those categories. And if the category is not material, use the spend-based method, or you can even omit it in some instances if it is really a small component. And when it comes to spend-based methods, whenever possible, tie everything to your general ledger. It is easier this way, especially when the auditors come with limited assurance engagement. It is easier for them to check what financial data you have used for your calculation.
But last but not least, if you can explain in few sentences only, so but it's a big topic. So supply chain, especially in retail industry, a lot of your climate impact comes from supply chain, the items what you sell, purchase and then sell. So how are you planning to deal with that? Very shortly, what's your plan? How to reduce the impact there?
Yeah, so basically our target for the scope 3 is so-called engagement target. So we are aiming on, our aim is that our suppliers would also set science-based targets themselves. And basically we know like the emission levels of our supplier with relation to the product that we sell. We're not using the directly sourced emission factors. Those are like, anyways, the industry averages. So basically we'll be talking more with our suppliers, and the biggest challenge we see here is the omnibus itself, as if the thresholds are very high for CSRD reporting, that will create so-called SME shields, and that will be a big challenge for us to get, the suppliers into the GHG calculation itself. So it is bringing a lot of questions. And another thing for us, as we are in the flag sector, so-called, the agricultural part, we'll need to change our current scope 3 targets, and we'll be doing that most likely next year. So that will also, shift the way we would be approaching our science-based targets and the reduction itself.
But shortly, as I understand, if among current webinar audience, there are some companies who also want to have their goods to be sold in Maxima stores, then they should consider and think about this, having their climate targets in place as well. So this is what you are asking and expecting from your suppliers.
Yeah, anyways, we'll be asking our suppliers what is their status, are they planning to set those goals, what is like their timeline, or maybe if they're not planning those goals. So we'll be talking more and more with our suppliers with regards to what is their current status on the the carbon emission side.
Very good. Well, thank you, Kirill, for sharing your practical experience. I think good work what you're doing there. I wish you good luck with that as well. And again, I appreciate that you joined us. So thank you for being here. And we have now come to some few conclusion slide in the end. Well, what we thought you should remember from here, the few highlights about this topic is that, well, at first, as I started the webinar as well, like having science-based targets in place is just one way how to do that. I think you can set well and good quality targets without maybe considering the same principles, but not going through the official validation. So yes, there are some pluses, as our speakers told as well, but I think it's not always the only possible way. So decide at first if you need climate targets, and then if you need climate targets which are SBTi validated or not. So you can go either this or that way. So make up your mind there. And then, especially if you go to SBTi validation, but even without that, if you're not aiming for the official validation, then science-based targets provides a lot of useful information, which is publicly and freely available. So go there. Of course, it might be complicated and overload you as well in the beginning. So, but still, a lot of useful information available. We have provided a couple of addresses from SBTi own website. So there are 2 of them, so consider those, go through the materials there. Then thirdly, of course, if you have done, if not, you should do your climate impact calculation for the base year. But if you have done it already, then review this in the context of the same SBTi recommendation. So is this sufficient? Is the scope wide enough? Have you covered all the material categories? So maybe you need to adjust that, so to leave in only the relevant scope 3 categories. And then when you go to target setting, yes, start with near-term targets. As Taavi also highlighted, this is what you should do anyway at first on this longer neutrality journey. So think what could you do in order to reduce the impact in a 5 or 10 years period. And especially if you do this or for a science-based targets validation, but even without that. So I think this is one of the learnings from all the speakers and companies always, is that it takes more time than you most probably think. So take your time if needed, as we told, involve external assistance as well. Our experience and the feedback from our customers, what we have gained is that this helps to get things done quicker. So to avoid going into some let's say struggles or mistakes what others have done. So find the shortcuts. And this is why I help with a slide where we with Sustinere team can assist either in Estonia, Latvia or Lithuania. We have offices in 3 of all of these market. So yes, we can help you to understand where are you right now, what's the current situation, and what are the gaps for you in order to set a proper climate target, benchmark what the market is doing. So basically help you to understand like where you are and what you need to do in order to set the proper targets. Then align your carbon footprint calculations with the requirements. So either to expand or set the focus there. And then what Taavi also highlighted, maybe what's the major part is, and our speakers also described, so help you to conduct a scenario analysis, so to see what is the climate impact reduction potential of different activities, what you could take, so to calculate these and through that understand like what could be the target and the path for you. And when it goes to already very, let's say, technical target setting, then yes, help you to find the right methods and approaches to set feasible targets. And if you really go to science-based targets validation, then we know that this let's say bureaucracy and then paperwork behind there is quite extensive. So yes, filling in the submission forms, coordinating and communicating with a verifier. So this is what we have done for a few of our customers as well. And once this is all done, yes, we can support you in saying out and establishing and then saying out a proper communication messages as well around that. So these are these major things where we see that we could add value on the journey if you want either to set climate targets or if you especially want to do it for SBTi validation. So this is what we wanted to share with you. Our time is up. Thank you for Taavi for opening the topic and special thanks to Adriana, Kaidi and Kirill for joining and sharing their experiences. These are our contacts. If you want to ask anything, approach us. We gladly support you, and I'm sure that we meet sooner or later somewhere. So thank you for being here and have a nice summer week ahead.